What are some of the smartest crimes out there? Let's find out, starting with number 6, farming royalty. A Chinese farmer named Wang Fengying managed to swindle more than 2 million yuan, or about 275,000 US dollars. Her scheme involved posing as Princess Changping, a descendant of the Aisin Gioro royal family, and she claimed to control frozen royal assets worth billions of yuan. Partnering with Yang Jianglin, another person without royal credentials, Wang concocted a plan to capitalize on her phony royal identity. Claiming to be worth 175 billion yuan, which is roughly 23 billion US dollars, she promised investors high returns if they contributed to her venture. She said the investments would unfreeze the substantial assets she supposedly managed. To make her con more convincing, Wang went as far as acquiring counterfeit American dollars and fake gold bars, complete with royal insignia and historical dates. Over a period of roughly a year and a half, the duo managed to execute this scam 13 times, raking in $290,000 in the process. However, the Fengying dynasty eventually crumbled when one victim realized they had been swindled and told the authorities. A subsequent police raid on Wang's operation revealed 41 bogus gold items and nearly 7,000 counterfeit American bills. Both Wang Fengying and Yang Jianglin faced the consequences of their actions after a trial in Jian, central China. Wang was sentenced to 13 years and 6 months in prison and fined 500,000 yuan, or $68,000, while Yang received a 12-year prison sentence with the same fine. Sounds like there's going to be a whole lot of farming in that princess's future. Number 5, unclaimed baggage. A Delta Airlines baggage handler, Quincy Thorpe, found himself in big trouble alongside his alleged accomplice, Emmanuel Auguo Okon, in a high-stakes trial in New York City. The duo stands accused of orchestrating the disappearance of $300,000 in cash. The money in question was initially meant to be loaded onto a flight from JFK Airport to Miami, tucked away securely in 8 money bags. Quincy Thorpe, working in Delta's Ground Services Division, was assigned the task of loading these bags onto the aircraft. As the bags were being meticulously scanned and loaded onto the plane, Thorpe was allegedly captured on surveillance cameras diverting one of the money bags from the armored car into a white van, deviating from the intended flight path. He then drove the van to meet with Emmanuel Okon on the public side of the airport. Authorities got wind of their little caper, and when they got their hands on Okon's car, they hit the jackpot. Inside, they found receipts from the armored car company and Delta cargo tags, solid evidence that pointed straight at Quincy and Okon. In the end, both Quincy Thorpe and Emmanuel Okon were arrested and faced charges that could land them in prison for up to 10 years. But despite all the investigating, no one has any clue where the money disappeared to. Quincy's lawyer played the scapegoat card, claiming his client was just taking the fall for a massive security blunder. They tried to pin the heist on someone else entirely, a guy named Jeremy Hollingsworth, who's supposed to spill the beans on the whole operation during the trial. With no concrete proof pointing fingers directly at Quincy, this trial is shaping up to be a real nail-biter. At the time of this video, the trial is yet to start, so keep your eyes peeled because we're all waiting to see whether Quincy and Okon are going to walk out as free men or find themselves behind bars. Number 4, psychics aren't real? In Ohio, a self-proclaimed psychic, as if there's any other kind, by the name of Gina B Miller, didn't just tell fortunes, she allegedly manipulated people into financing her lavish lifestyle. Imagine you're walking down the street when a well-dressed woman approaches you with an air of mystery and confidence. She tells you she's a psychic, and she sees something troubling in your future. But what if I told you that this seemingly mystical encounter could lead to something far more sinister than a few goosebumps? It all started when Miller managed managed to convince clients that their lives were in grave danger, that only she could save them from their fates. She would spin tales of impending doom, claiming that clients and their families faced the possibility of harm unless they paid up. One client was told that her grandson's life hung in the balance and could only be saved if Miller was to buy a Cadillac. Another was made to believe that her beloved horses' lives were on the line unless she forked over some cash. And yet another was informed that her house was at risk of going up in flames. Miller accepted a variety of extravagant items as payment: Rolex watches, diamond rings, cell phones, cars, you name it. She knew how to target her clients' vulnerabilities and get them to part with their possessions willingly. Her operation lasted nearly 15 years, operating under the guise of Gina's Psychic Studio in Mentor, Ohio. A client eventually grew suspicious and reported Miller's activities to the authorities. That's when the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation stepped in and an agent went undercover. In the end, Miller's attorney argued for leniency, painting a picture of her as the primary caregiver for two teenage sons, one of whom had a mental illness. However, the judge was having none of it. He handed down the maximum sentence for a second-degree felony, 8 years behind bars. This is a pretty clever scam, and to be honest, even the most skeptical among us are going to be like, what? And you'd have to think a little, right? And how do you think Miller managed to find her clients in the first place? Did she have a secret crystal ball that led her to vulnerable targets, or was it all just a matter of chance encounters on the street? Number 3. Charlatan Psychic. Another psychic, Cynthia Burt, also known as Sabrina Burt or Sable, found herself in hot water facing a slew of legal troubles. Burt was arrested and charged with a whopping 10 counts of fraud after ripping off 10 people for over $72,000. The strange saga began to unfold over the course of a year as reports of eerily similar incidents poured in from the Sable Psychic Studio, the business Burt operated. It's alleged that during this time, Burt managed to defraud no less than 10 people in Alberta, Canada, and there are concerns that there may be more victims in Ontario. The grand total of the alleged fraud? An eye-popping $72,500, with one unfortunate soul claiming losses amounting to $20,250. Bert's alleged scam involved convincing her clients that they needed a special crystal to cleanse them of negative energy. However, to obtain this mystical rock, clients had to dig deep into their wallets, coughing up thousands of dollars. Mystical rocks are expensive, you know. Burt promised these clients that they'd get their money back once the crystal procedure was complete. Spoiler alert, the procedure never happened and the refunds remained elusive. Now let's pause for a moment and ponder this. Shouldn't all psychic services be labeled as potential scams? After all, the very essence of psychic work revolves around predictions, energies, and the unknown. It's not illegal to offer palm reading or psychic services, but it is illegal to scam people. So where do we draw the line between a legitimate psychic service and a fraudulent one? As this case unfolds, one thing is clear. It's essential to separate the genuine from the scams when exploring the world of psychics. In a realm where belief and skepticism collide, common sense becomes our most potent crystal ball, helping us navigate the fine line between what's authentic and what's not, which, in the case of psychics, is always going to be not. Aren't psychics supposed to be able to tell what moves they're supposed to do to not end up getting arrested? Number 2. The Zombie House. Imagine hiring seniors to pull off a real estate scam that would put Hollywood's best con artists to shame. Well, Adder Bigby Augendieren did just that in a crazy scheme that unfolded in Brooklyn, New York. Augendieren managed to steal 6 properties across the borough, including a 10-bedroom mansion built in 1868, by making a bunch of zombies. Not literally, of course, since that whole ordeal hasn't started yet, but he hired seniors to pose as deceased property owners. Some of these owners had been deceased for up to 15 years. To pull off this real estate heist, Augendieren forged driver's license, created aliases, and set up corporate alter egos. He even dabbled in forgery and identity theft, using personal information to support his con. One of his more heinous moves was transferring ownership of a mansion overlooking Fort Greene Park to a corporation he controlled. The house had belonged to a man man who had passed away, but his elderly sister still resided there, until Augendieren decided to try and steal it. And Augendieren didn't stop there. He continued his spree, taking controls of buildings in neighborhoods like Crown Heights, Belford-Stuyvesant, and East New York. Most of these properties were vacant, though some still had tenants living inside. The scheme unraveled when the elderly woman living in the Fort Greene mansion received an eviction notice. Imagine the shock of finding out your home, which was apparently overrun with 85 cats and was filled with looks and smells associated with that amount of cats, was no longer yours. The victim and her cats were not happy, so they alerted the authorities. Augendieren's defense attorney claimed that his client was the true victim in this case because, of course, he was. According to him, Augendieren had purchased 2 of these houses from individuals who said they were the owners and allegedly lost money on one of those deals. Obviously, a true victim would be stealing identities and forging documents to steal houses. What a clown. Augendieren, a Nigerian national who has been a permanent resident for nearly 20 years, could face up to 25 years behind bars if convicted. The Brooklyn District Attorney had a word of advice for homeowners. Register with the Automated City Register Information System to stay informed about changes made to documents associated with their property. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay tuned right here to find out how he was able to counterfeit more money than anyone in history. Number 1. TikTok Oscars. In the wild world of scams, a plot that could have come straight out of a Hollywood script unfolded, leaving the Australian tax office, known as the ATO, with a massive headache and costing taxpayers $4.6 billion. The scam, which began circulating on TikTok, promised individuals a seemingly effortless way to make a quick buck by exploiting the goods and services tax, known as the GST system in Australia. GST is a value-added tax levied on most goods and services consumed in the country. The scammers encouraged people to create fake businesses. This involved obtaining an Australian business number, or ABN, and registering for GST. The ABN is a unique identifier for businesses in Australia, similar to a tax ID in the United States. After setting up their fake businesses, these fraudsters would falsely claim that they had incurred significant expenses on equipment and supplies and file business activity statements with these made-up expenses. They'd claim 10% of these imaginary expenses as GST refunds, but many of the scammers had no legitimate expenses to claim. This meant that the ATO was effectively returning money to individuals who hadn't contributed to the GST pool in the first place. The scam spread like wildfire on TikTok, with users sharing videos and tips on how to pull off this apparent money hack. It attracted curious social media enthusiasts as well as organized crime figures. Enter Mustafa Hafizi, the alleged leader of the Hells Angel Parramatta chapter. Hafizi was one of the central figures in this elaborate scheme. He and 2 others were charged with orchestrating the $1.6 billion scam through TikTok and Facebook. As the scam gained momentum, the cost to taxpayers soared, and the ATO struggled to keep up. In response to this fraud, the ATO launched Operation Protego and partnered with the Australian Federal Police to investigate. Their efforts culminated in a series of raids and arrests. However, Hafizi's criminal career wasn't confined to financial fraud. He made headlines for a theatrical arrest where he put on a show, claiming officers were hurting his shoulder. The presiding judge felt his performance was Oscar-worthy, though it didn't get him out of any trouble. For this scam, Hafizi showed a slew of charges, including obtaining financial advantage by deception, conspiracy, and dealing with proceeds of money or property worth $1,000. Hafizi was granted bail, but faces the possibility of a maximum penalty of 10 years imprisonment if convicted.
We've all seen a movie or TV show where some sleazy guy in a suit prints fake US dollars on a giant printer inside a decrepit warehouse. For Frank Barusa, this trope was a reality, and one he was really good at. Unlike the fictional depictions, printing and distributing is very difficult to pull off, making Barusa's criminal achievements more impressive. He created a fake $20 bill that no one could detect with the naked eye. In fact, only trained professionals can tell the difference between a US Mint printed $20 bill and a Barusa 20. Barusa printed thousands and thousands of Andrew Jacksons during his stint as a money counterfeiter. In total, he printed over 250 million worth of 20s. Some of those bills stayed in circulation long after the authorities shut his printing factory down. the Secret Service continued finding his forged bills in California, Nevada, and small pockets of the northeastern United States. According to Celebrity Net Worth, $250 million is a lot of fake money in the counterfeit business. It's actually the all-time record for the most counterfeited money in U.S. history. And he's not even from the United States. Barusa grew up in Quebec, Canada, where he showed an aptitude for entrepreneurship at a very early age, though his business strategies usually involved making money outside of the law. Barusa started his first business when he was in junior high. How? He realized how easy it was to shoplift. He stole from all kinds of stores, took the items home, organized them, then sold them to distributors he knew from school. Before young Barusa knew it, he built a flourishing shoplifting ring. When Barusa turned 15, he quit the shoplifting ring and dropped out of high school. He moved out of his parents' house to work at a mechanic shop. However, the job didn't pay well, and Barusa often resorted to car theft to pay his bills. Eventually, Barusa got tired of working for someone else, so he founded a shoe factory in his early 20s. It was his first legal business. Running the actual business proved very difficult, a factor Barusa overlooked when he decided to start an honest business. Barusa decided the best thing to do was to sell the factory, which he did. According to media interviews, Barusa says running the factory burned him out. He claims he worked 20 hours a day. And for what? He kept asking himself. Barusa thought about it philosophically and came to a simplistic conclusion. Just like everyone else, he worked for money. Money was always the end goal. Barusa says he reached this conclusion while waiting at a red light. He came up with the idea to make money instead of working for it. However, as mentioned earlier, literally making money isn't as easy as it sounds. So, for the time being, Barusa returned to a different kind of crime, growing cannabis. Barusa literally grew his business to extreme heights, higher than his previous businesses, and it probably would have grown even more had he not got caught by the Mounties. The former cannabis grower spent 4 months in jail. Barusa decided enough was enough when he got out. It was time to try counterfeiting money. The first thing Barusa did was research. Lots of research. He wanted to do this right. He already learned how to grow his cannabis without any previous experience in the industry. He knew what it took to create a complex business from scratch. His primary source, ironically, was the United States Secret Service website. There, he learned that he had to counterfeit US dollars exclusively because of the type of paper they used. The US Mint still uses a combination of linen and cotton to manufacture their paper dollars, which is apparently an archaic way of making money. Barusa says the paper is easier to counterfeit. For example, other countries, even third world African nations, have moved on to better types of paper made of polymer. Still, the US adheres to the linen and cotton material of old. The new paper most countries use is almost impossible to reproduce, making it impractical to print when the United States' dollar is much easier. The Secret Service also mentioned what kind of printers they use to make US dollars. Remember, it was the early 2000s. Things were different. By then, Barusa had every bit of information he needed. He knew what kind of printer he needed and where to get it. He also learned what companies made the linen and cotton paper used to make US dollars through his research. All he had to do now was put his plan into action. The first thing Barusa needed was a printer. The only problem, money printers are expensive. Many sold in the 6-figure range, which is a lot of money for an ex-con with no real job. The rest of the necessary equipment, such as materials or ingredients, as Barusa calls them, were just as costly. Somehow, Barusa got the money together. He bought the printer for $125,000, and the paper materials cost $50,000. After adding up all the other expenses, the venture cost Barusa $325,000 Canadian dollars. The trickiest part, Barusa says, was getting the paper made. He bought the ingredients, but he needed a paper mill to manufacture the paper for him. If not, there was no way he could do that himself. The paper had to be made in a specific way, 75% cotton and 25% linen. He also needed them to put watermarked images of Andrew Jackson on the front of the paper. The image was a distinct mark of the legit $20 bill. Barusa says checkers hold the bill up to the light for verification. Without the watermark, anyone could spot them as fake. Fortunately, Barusa discovered the only paper mills that made paper like this were in Europe. The tricky part would be getting them to manufacture American paper bills with real watermarks. For that, Barusa needed a good plan. Enter Thomas More. Barusa contacted the European paper mills, specifically in Switzerland, as someone else, a fictional man named Thomas More. Moore asked the mills to make his paper into bills, the same size as a US dollar, along with the same ingredients as a dollar. At first, the mills were suspicious. Barusa assured them that he was legit, however. He told them he was an investment manager from the United States. His company wanted to manufacture their own bonds. Barusa told them that the bonds had to be made from secure paper. The mills believed Barusa's story. He was surprised they weren't suspicious, especially since he was printing Andrew Jackson's image onto his bills. Eventually, Barusa says he realized that most people in Switzerland didn't know who Andrew Jackson was, much less what he looked like. In other words, they didn't think twice about printing the watermark. Everything was going according to plan. Barusa instigated his plan in 2004 and didn't complete the printing operation until 2008. He and his crew printed 20s as quickly as possible until they built a massive inventory of fake cash. Now, he just needed some clients. Barusa maintained a few relationships with contacts in the criminal underground. He was specifically looking for organizations that needed clean money. Some of these organizations were looking to pump their money into continents like Africa, Asia, and Europe. Ideally, Barusa wanted his bills to circulate in these areas first before entering the United States. If the money moved around in these foreign nations before hitting the U.S., it'd be hard for federal agents to trace them back to Barusa. The newly established counterfeiter tasked one of his associates with finding organizations that fit Barusa's criteria. The associate had ties to the criminal underworld, so it wasn't long before Barusa had a few clients lined up. Barusa had the counterfeit business down to a system. First, an order came in. If an organization needed $100,000 in 20s, Barusa charged them $30,000. On a much smaller scale, his rate was $6 real for every 20 fake dollars. Most customers ordered six-figure sums like $100,000 or $200,000. Business was good. Barusa made all his money back in less than 3 orders. He says at the time there was no doubt in his mind that he would be a multi-millionaire. The dream was right there before him, and he didn't want to lose it. To protect his dream, Barusa became more paranoid with each subsequent order. The operation ran out of a big garage owned by the uncle of one of his associates. Barusa says he spent many hours looking through binoculars from the window while his team counted and packaged 20s. Waiting on the paper shipments from Switzerland was torture, he says. They often took weeks to arrive, and weeks were more than enough time for a team of cops to set up a sting at the harbor. Nevertheless, Barusa pushed past his paranoia and kept the business going. Eventually, he reached his 5th client who ordered $100,000 worth of 20s, a pretty normal order. Then the next day, that same client ordered another $100K, which seemed a little odd. Nevertheless, Barusa delivered the order, not knowing that the 5th client was an undercover agent posing as a gangster. On May 23, 2012, at 5 in the morning, Barusa woke up to someone yelling at his front door. Then, the person slammed on the door, screaming for him to come quietly. Barusa opened the door and saw a squad of Royal Canadian Mounted Police representatives and 2 U.S. Secret Service agents standing on his doorstep. The Mounties took Barusa into custody and charged him with several counts of fraud. They explained to Barusa that he was probably facing around 60 years in prison for what he'd done. The police had already located $949,000 in Barusa's counterfeit 20s. They had all the evidence they needed, but they didn't have all the fake 20s, anywhere near all 250 million worth. In fact, they didn't know it existed. In a crazy turn of events, the Canadian government realized they couldn't use some of the evidence they obtained from Barusa's business. The evidence itself was inconclusive, and they released him on a $10,000 bond. Meanwhile, the Secret Service watched Barusa like a hawk, waiting for him to mess up. Barusa was walking on a tightrope. The Secret Service would inevitably catch him doing something illegal and extradite him to America. The Secret Service and the Canadian government didn't want Barusa circulating fake money anymore after he told them how much he had stashed away. So the Canadian government brokered a deal with Barusa. We'll only charge you with drug possession, fine you $1,500, and imprison you for 45 days if you hand over the rest of your counterfeit money. Barusa accepted the deal and spent less time in jail for counterfeiting than he did growing cannabis. When Barusa was released from prison, he started his own security company, similar to another Frank who's famous for mass forgery. Barusa also founded a self-help brand called the Paradigm Shift System. He's become a guru of sorts. Now, he might follow in the footsteps of Frank Abagnale and have a biopic produced based on his life. If Barusa's life is immortalized on screen, he could become America's next legendary criminal folk hero. But only time will tell.
Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section what you'd rather have. Make $5 million a year, but you're clinically depressed, or make the median average US income, but be as happy as anyone could be.